Hello you, big thanks from me to you for buying the Ultimate Hyperlapse course. I am super pumped to have you here and I'm super excited to learn you. That's a Dutch word that always gets mistranslated to English. To teach you everything I know about hyperlapse photography, which honestly is quite a lot. I've been doing hyperlapse photography since almost 11 years ago now, at time of filming. Hyperlapse didn't exist, or the word hyperlapse didn't exist when I started doing hyperlapses, so you've got lots to look forward to. From planning, prepping, shooting, stabilizing, color grading, etc. It's all covered in this course. To access it, just log in via the details you've got via your email. You can also download an app on your phone or tablet to access the course. And that's pretty much it. I'll see you there. Bye. Hello you and welcome to the Ultimate Hyperlapse course. As I mentioned in the thank you video, I am super thankful and super hyped and pumped and whatever you want to call it to have you here. Some of this course was recorded last year, some of this course is recorded this year, hence the change in backdrops and filming quality, etc. But the gist of it is you're about to learn a decades worth of knowledge of hyperlapse shooting, planning, processing, editing, color grading, stabilizing, whatever you want to call it, whatever you want to learn, it's all in this course. You can go through the course chapter by chapter, you can jump from one chapter to the next, you can have a look at all the subjects that are lined up and choose which ones you want to watch first, or just follow my suggested path through all this knowledge, because that's what it is. It's all of my knowledge from this brain going into yours, and I'm super excited about that. You can find your downloads at the bottom of each video or on the side of each video page, and that's, I think, everything you need to know. So, let's begin. Time-lapse in a nutshell. Before moving into the very fine specifics, the technical details of time-lapse photography, let's have a look at the basics and what time-lapse actually is. So the purpose of time-lapse is to capture the world and show it at a different speed. I always call it, because it sounds cool, it's showing the world as a hidden dimension. It's a different temporal perspective that we're creating, pretty much. We do this, as opposed to what a lot of people think, not by shooting video and speeding it up. We do this by shooting high-resolution RAW photos. The reason we shoot high-resolution RAW photos, not JPEGs, because they're compressed, the reason we shoot RAW photos, which most cameras these days do, even smartphones, is because you have so many more capabilities and options to edit the image in post. Now the workflow for this editing in post is that you're going to color grade your RAW photos, save the metadata, save all the settings, and then you're going to turn that sequence of photos into a video file. These RAW photos are shot obviously at a fixed interval, the interval being the frequency, the amount of seconds in between photos. This can be half a second or 1 second in between photos. As long as you do it for an extended period of time, you'll have a sequence of RAW photos that we're going to turn into a video file. This turning it into a video file is what we call rendering. You could call it transcoding or transforming. You're pretty much taking a bunch of photos and making a video file where every single video frame of that video file is obviously consistent of one of those RAW photos. Now, some of the benefits of RAW photos versus video are, first of all, if you're shooting a large resolution video file to equal the resolution of the RAW photos, like most cameras now have, 20, 25, 30, 45 megapixels. They're massive. If you want to have that same resolution with a video camera, you need a very, very expensive video camera. I don't think there are even many video cameras that can shoot the highest resolution that we have with photos now. There's, for example, some cameras that shoot 100 megapixel photos. I don't think there's any video cameras that do that just yet. So resolution is number one, something you won't be able to achieve with shooting video and then speeding it up. Secondly, shooting video and then speeding it up, you're shooting 25 or 30 frames per second in this video file. And then you're going to squeeze it all together and speed it all up. So it's a total waste of energy. Speaking of energy, you burn much more battery, you use much more energy rolling video like that versus shooting RAW files. What else is different? Your dynamic range of a RAW file is on average much higher than when shooting video. White balance adjustments are another thing that are easy to do with RAW files versus most video files. They don't have that capability. Storage is another thing. Again, all these frames per second that you're then eventually going to speed up when you're shooting a video file, that's much more data that you're consuming compared to shooting a sequence of RAW photos. There are many more benefits, but these are the main ones. The benefits of shooting RAW photos at a fixed interval to create a time-lapse video versus shooting a video file and speeding that up. One more thing that I just realized as well. Shutter speed. Sometimes you want to have a long shutter speed. For example, shooting astro when it's nighttime, you want to shoot the galactic core, which is coming up in this course obviously as well, which is one of my favorite chapters. You can't have a long shutter speed in video. You can't have a 20-second exposure time per video frame. That's not how video works. So all these things combined should, tell you why you should be shooting raw photos. If by some chance you don't know what a raw photo is, a raw photo isn't really a photo. It is a collection of data that comes straight from the camera's sensor. Most cameras that we are familiar with, point and shoots, phones, whatever it is, they create JPEG photos. Now, JPEG photos are heavily compressed versions of this raw data. Every camera shoots a raw photo and then makes a compressed JPEG out of that if they're delivering JPEG files. But the raw file holds so much more data that we can edit later on. As I mentioned, you can push and pull your exposure quite a bit, which allows us to shoot holy grail photos, which is another future chapter. You can change your white balance after the fact, going from cool to warm, or whatever you want to call it, from a low to a high Kelvin, and all these things. So that's pretty much a broad overview of time-lapse photography as a concept and why we shoot raw photos instead of video. Now let's move on to the next chapter where we'll talk about time-lapse camera gear or camera equipment. The equipment or camera gear you need to record a basic time-lapse sequence is perhaps, unsurprisingly, fairly basic. More advanced time-lapses naturally require more advanced gear. For the sake of understanding and explaining the methods and processes more easily, I've come up with the following 3 different categories of shooting. First, we have beginner time-lapse. The majority of modern-day cameras and phones have some form of time-lapse recording mode built right into the software. Oftentimes, these beginner methods don't actually record photo files. They just generate a video file in camera by recording individual video frames every few seconds, and it stitches them all together as you're shooting. I don't recommend shooting in these methods as they don't give you much room in post-production to generate high-quality files. However, if all you're looking for is a short and easy to make clip to share with a friend, for example, this shooting method can be very handy. Think of fluffy clouds floating by as you're having a coffee on a terrace with a view in Italy somewhere. You're traveling light with no camera bag, so you whip your phone out, try and balance it against an ashtray on your wobbly table, and you let it run for a few minutes. What do you need? A device with a built-in time-lapse mode with no post-processing involved. This could be your phone or a small action camera. Basic time-lapse. The basic method of shooting time-lapses involves a dedicated camera setup and an intervalometer. The intervalometer is the device often called time-lapse remote that triggers the shutter button for you every few seconds. Most modern cameras have an intervalometer built in. However, I most often recommend shooting with an external physical remote. The subject of a basic time-lapse shot has so-called static lighting, which means we won't have to change any camera or exposure settings as we are shooting, because you, the time-lapse photographer, need full control over the image with a dedicated manual mode. Think of a daytime shot of a city or skyline, or a nighttime shot from an overpass of cars driving on a highway. Funnily enough, astrophotography time-lapse sequences also fall under the basic time-lapse method, as they don't necessarily require any advanced equipment, just a really dark sky and a photographer willing to brave the cold. What do you need? A camera with preferably an external time-lapse remote with a manual shooting mode and raw photo support. Then we have advanced time-lapse. Any type of time-lapse that doesn't fit in the beginner or basic category is what I call an advanced time-lapse. Think of a sunrise or sunset where you have to account for changing light conditions, so-called holy grail time-lapses. Or a motion control time-lapse where you set the camera on a slider, or a hyperlapse where you move the camera half a meter between photos. What do you need? A camera with manual mode, raw photo support, an external time-lapse remote, also known as an intervalometer, and a motion control device, if so desired. I've made you a little camera gear checklist for your basic time-lapse shoots. Feel free to print it out and put it in your camera bag. I have no doubt that this sort of checklist will save you from a horrendous headache at some point in the future. I've been in this time-lapse game for quite a few years now, and I still use a gear checklist on all of my commercial productions and travel projects. The last thing you need on a paid shoot is to explain to the client that your time lapses are wobbly because you forgot your camera's tripod plate and you had to tape the camera to the tripod head. Obviously, there are many more items you can pack in your bag, such as ND filters, polarizers, motion control gear, etc. However, these are the absolutely crucial items, which is why they made the cut. Feel free to copy and adjust this list however you see fit. Tune it to your needs, obviously. So, time-lapse camera gear checklist. Camera, lens, batteries, memory cards, intervalometer, tripod mounting plate, camera strap, and a lens cloth or a cleaning kit. It's weird to do this in a video, but I'm making videos out of all these chapters and then some, so there you have it. I highly recommend making this list yourself or copying it from the text below this video or from the ebook that you already also have to tune it to your needs, because it is just of crucial importance. Anyways, next one. Inspecting and preparing your camera gear. Imagine arriving at your location with stunning shooting conditions, but you can see that the weather is changing rapidly and you want to start shooting as soon as possible to capture whatever is left of the beautiful light. With just a handful of minutes to spare, you're setting up your gear and you notice that your camera's battery is at 25%. Your memory card only has 100 photos left to record. And you're not sure if you've even got that memory card backed up yet. And to top it all off, there's a big smudge on your lens, and all of a sudden, you vaguely remember seeing some dirt spots on your photos during your last editing session. If you're feeling stressed hearing this, imagine how stressed you'll be when you're actually on location. Spending less than a handful of minutes by inspecting and preparing your camera gear before you head out can make all the difference between an incredibly frustrating and stressful mission or a totally relaxing and rewarding time-lapse shoot. The following steps explain how I inspect my gear and pack my bag before I head out on any shoot. Grab all the gear you plan on taking and put it on a table or put it on the floor. Having your whole kit spread out in front of you makes it easier to tick off all the items from your gear checklist. Check your lens or lenses for smudges or marks on the glass and clean them where needed. I use a blower, a little brush, and a lens pen, special lens cleaning fluid, and cloths. These usually come in a bundle. Once clean, place the lens or lenses in your bag. Power on your camera and check if the memory card is empty. Reset the image count if possible. Shooting a sequence where the file numbers jump from 9999 to 0000 means you will have to fix these sequence numbers by renaming your photos in post-production. Not a tricky thing to do, you will learn how later in this course, but it is something that can save you a few minutes in post by clicking a few buttons in camera. Check the battery levels of your camera as well as your intervalometer or time-lapse remote. If you're bringing spares, make sure those are charged too. I often have a spare pack of AAA or 2032 batteries in my camera bag for these types of gadgets. If you're carrying motion control gear or extra electronics with you, make sure to check those battery levels too. On top of that, it will save you a lot of frustration if you make sure that your firmware is up to date. Once you've inspected all your gear, pack your bag. Be smart about how you load it. Having a well-balanced bag can make all the difference for your back and neck on long walks. Keep frequently used accessories such as your memory cards, batteries, or intervalometers and remotes in easy-to-reach places. Do not forget to bring a bottle of water and a snack. It has happened more often than I'd care to admit that my time-lapse missions went on for many more hours than initially planned, resulting in a parched and very hungry Matt. At some point in the future, it will pay off to have a plastic poncho in your bag, ideally a reusable one to cut down on waste. You and your gear will be thankful when you get caught in a massive downpour. Same goes for having a roll of gaffer's tape. Both these items are cheap but are potential lifesavers. Lastly, make sure your phone is charged and bring a spare power bank and charging cable with you, just in case. Virtual location scouting. I reckon it's fair to say that the majority of our current world has been digitized in one way or another. From Google's Street View project, which has mapped nearly every house facade and street corner, to Apple Maps with its almost disturbing three-dimensional satellite views. You can virtually find any place in the world you can think of with a simple web search on your phone. Regardless of how you feel about this data is incredibly useful to plan your time-lapse missions. In this chapter, you'll learn which methods I use to virtually scout a location before heading over. The first thing I do is look up my intended location on Google Maps. If the Street View option, where you get the point of view as if you're standing on the street, isn't delivering your desired result, then you might get lucky and find a local photographer's own submitted photos for that location.
Alternatively, you can find other random photos from people's reviews of the location you are heading to. If Google Maps isn't being useful, you can do a quick internet search to see if anyone has written a blog post or made a photographer's location guide of the city or location you're in. This is becoming more and more popular, I've noticed recently. I should probably get around to making one of those guides for Sydney or maybe from London myself, as I get the question, hey Matt, where's a good sunset spot around town, more often than you would think. If that isn't useful, you can open up Instagram or whichever photo sharing platform is most popular in the region and find users' photos and posts from the geotag or location of your spot. Sometimes you get lucky and you'll see, for example, a photo of the sunset from the day before, which can tell you exactly where and how you can line up your shot. If none of those options are helpful, you can look into the following planning tools. Firstly, Photo Ephemeris Web. Photo Ephemeris Web is a free-to-use desktop browser-based photography planning tool. It is a map-based sun, moon, and Milky Way calculator, and it helps you to plan your outdoor photography shoot with incredible precision. The desktop web browser is free to use, but you need to register for an account to use it. There is also a paid mobile app available. Check out Photo Ephemeris Web down below. Then there's PhotoPills. PhotoPills is quite similar to Photo Ephemeris, however, it is strictly a mobile app. It's one of my favorite apps to use for time-lapse and other sorts of photography-related planning. The app works on iOS and Android and features augmented reality modes to help you line up your shots using your phone camera. It has a built-in time-lapse calculator, it has an exposure calculator for when you're using filters, it allows you to save locations and shot plans, it gives you everything you need to know about the sun, the moon, and the Milky Way, and so much more. The team behind the app listens to user feedback and has implemented a ton of useful tools to make your life as a time-lapse photographer easier. Check out PhotoPills down below as well. It's no surprise that golden hour is the favorite time of day for many photographers out there. Sometimes, however, you get a blue and gray fizzle, when at other times you get the most incredible sky, which looks like it's on fire. Many people think it's a numbers game. You just have to keep heading out and eventually you'll get lucky enough to get a gorgeous sky. And yes, that is correct. Eventually you will capture some gold. But wouldn't it be so much easier if you could accurately predict whether or not it will be worth heading out? Let's use a sunset as an example. There are two things you need for a great, colorful sunset: a clear horizon and a little bit of cloud cover. To see whether the horizon is clear, I either just look out at the horizon if I have a clear line of sight, or I use webcams. Most people aren't aware that the majority of big cities and famous places have publicly accessible webcams available 24/7. A quick Google search of your location or city and the words public webcam can offer you world-class views to help you predict the conditions you're looking for. Now, before moving on, how do sunsets actually work, and why do they sometimes turn the sky all red? The sun is continuously shining down on us with its bright white light. This light is white because it contains the entire visible color spectrum. As the sun moves lower and eventually disappears under the horizon, the wavelengths of the white sunlight have to travel through more of our atmosphere, and they eventually get absorbed and scattered differently. Blue light gets scattered more, which results in more yellow and red light reaching us. This light bounces around and hopefully lands on some nice cloud structures, resulting in what I like to call a fire sky. Let's simplify things here and say that there are three cloud heights: low, mid, and high. The golden light hits low to mid clouds, which often move at a considerable pace and look great in long exposures. As the sun sets more, we start moving through the color spectrum: yellow, orange, red, pink. Because of how long it takes for the wavelengths to filter to the pink and purple end of the spectrum, this light most often only hits the bottom of the high clouds. With low clouds, you'll get one side of the cloud illuminated, and depending on their movement, this can result in some very great long exposure shots. For time-lapse, I like to shoot with a fast interval, like 2 or 3 seconds, so that I can capture a lot of footage of a short-lived phenomenon. In mid-cloud situations, you can often see a golden glow on the bottom of the cloud well before the sun is near the horizon. In high cloud situations, you have to wait until you are sure they won't color up at all. This might be because the sunlight is blocked by a distant cloud structure invisible from our point of view. It's also a good idea to keep an eye on what is happening in the sky behind you, as that is often an indication of what is to come. Because of our planet's rotation and movement, the sky will start getting hit with color behind you first if you are facing the setting sun. Keep an eye out for distant objects like buildings, mountains, or even clouds blocking light and casting a shadow on the bottom of this high cloud. Every place has different weather. Sydney sunsets are wildly different from London ones. The only way to get really good at them is to observe a lot. Besides this pretty basic approach to sunset predictions, there are websites like SunsetWX, Windy.com, MySunset that provide cloud altitude and wind data. These are great to predict sunrises, as the horizon is unlikely to be visible a few hours before sunrise. Here are two services that you can use that I or my friends use. The first one is SunsetWX, which is North America centered, but it has a global forecast as well. So let's have a look at Europe's sunrise forecast. It says here a better sunrise is denoted by warmer colors. And if you go forward 3, 6, 9, 12 hours, whatever, you will see what the sunrise might do. It's got the same for sunset, pretty straightforward, pretty simple to use. And then there is Alpenglow as well, which is a pretty straightforward app. I don't use it, but I will be checking it out to see if I can maybe make a YouTube video about it. But it's cross-platform now, and it's got a smart watch app as well. And pretty much all it does is it gives you a percentage of is it going to be a good sunrise or sunset or not. It also gives you some important times like blue hour, golden hour. And with the paid version of the app, you can look further into the future, which might be handy. And that's that. As soon as you arrive at your location, make sure to walk around the entire place. It is frustrating to set up and start your shot, only to afterwards find a better location or angle only a few meters away. Realize that your location might get busy with tourists or locals. There's a spot in Sydney right across from the city centre, which has amazing city views, but gets overrun by tourist buses right around sunset. Blinded by their enthusiasm, these people often try and get the exact same shot as you're shooting because you look like a pro and your shot must be great, right? This can result in them leaning too close or bumping your tripod, potentially ruining your precious shot. Be vigilant and block off access to your tripod or your setup with your camera bag, for example. If you're setting up on a wooden deck, walkway, or metal railing, realize that your or other people's movements might shake the camera. Before starting the sequence, jump around to see how it affects the camera's stability. This will especially show up with longer focal lengths, of course. Keep an eye on the weather and your surroundings. If the wind picks up drastically, this can affect your stability too. If you're on a beach or on a sandy spot, rising water levels or rain can impact the stability of the soil, causing your tripod legs to slowly sink in. This might not be noticeable while shooting, but it will show up later when you're reviewing your footage. And lastly, make sure your camera as well as your camera bag are easily accessible throughout the shoot in case you need to swap out a memory card or a battery. Now that we've checked and prepped our setup for potential hazards, let's set up our camera to shoot a basic time-lapse sequence. Here's how to set up a basic time-lapse sequence. For your convenience, you will find a shorter recap down below. Mount your camera on your tripod and make sure your entire setup is sturdy and free from any external vibrations or shakes. Make sure your setup is level and can't tip over due to wind or, in a worst case scenario, someone bumping into it. Power on your camera and switch the mode dial to M for manual. Make sure you're shooting RAW photos. You can shoot RAW and JPEG photos if you want. This might be useful for a quick check of your shot by processing just the JPEG photos. Processing RAW photos takes much longer, but in the end gives much better results. Go into your camera's menu and disable image review. Most cameras show the photo on the screen right after you take it. This isn't great for time-lapse shooters as it slows the camera down and might cause it to miss shots in your sequence. You should also disable built-in noise reduction, as this slows the camera down even further and will be applying noise reduction in post-production anyway. Using your camera's light meter or histogram, dial in the correct exposure settings for the scene in front of you. This obviously varies shot per shot here. I recommend matrix or evaluative light metering to get the right ID for the scene. Make sure your ISO and white balance are set to manual as well. The reason we set everything ourselves manually is because we don't want to let the camera make any decisions. Most often the camera doesn't know it is shooting a time-lapse, so it will make the wrong decision when it comes to exposures, resulting in visually distracting flicker. Because of slightly inconsistent mechanical movements inside of your lens, you can end up with so-called aperture flickering in your sequence. This results in even more of that distracting flicker. You can prevent this by shooting wide open, the widest aperture your lens has, or by shooting with a lens that has a manual aperture ring. Older lenses and expensive cinema lenses have this. Frame up your composition. If you are happy with your framing and you are shooting on a zoom lens, I recommend zooming out by just a few millimeters, so you have a small amount of room to reframe in post if needed. This will come in handy if your shot is wobbly or shaky and you need to stabilize. Focus your lens, then disable autofocus. If you leave autofocus on, then your camera will likely try and focus for every shot that it fires in the sequence. Not only does this slow the camera down, allowing for less time in between shots to review the image, every now and then it will miss the focus, resulting in a sequence where some of the images are out of focus. For this exact reason, I recommend enabling back button focus on your camera, which removes the focus action from the shutter button and places it on one of the buttons on the back of the camera. Disable lens and sensor stabilization if you have them. Keep them on and the camera will be hunting for motion, resulting in a moving shot. This is the reason a lot of beginners get blurry shots when shooting long exposure photos on a tripod. They think the extra stabilization will result in a rock-solid setup and a tack-sharp photo, where in reality, the total opposite is true. Grab your remote or intervalometer and connect it to your camera. Make sure the counter, often marked as N, is set to 0 or dash. That means that there is no limit to how many photos it will shoot. Select your desired interval using the following guidelines, but feel free to adjust as you please. People or foot traffic, 1 second. Vehicular traffic, 1 to 2 seconds. Clouds and cityscapes, 3 to 5 seconds. Sunset or sunrise, 6 seconds minimum. Double check all your settings, then hit start on the remote. Sit back and relax. This is a great time to read a book, listen to a podcast, take photos on your phone of your time-lapse setup and location, or just take in the beautiful view. Once your sequence is running, do not interrupt it. I know it can be tempting to change framing because something interesting is happening just outside of it. However, if you do interrupt it, you'll most likely end up with 2 mediocre sequences instead of 1 good one. Let the sequence run for at least 300 photos. You can use the below timing table and a clock or stopwatch on your phone to keep track of when you're supposed to be done shooting. The reason I don't recommend setting a fixed number of photos on the remote itself is because sometimes something happens in the frame and you want to extend the shot length. Instead of fumbling with the remote while the camera is shooting, you can just let it run for longer until whatever interesting thing is happening is over. Once the sequence is finished, and if your camera allows you to, you should create a new folder on the memory card. This will save you a fair amount of time in post-production later on. If you can't create a new folder, you can shoot a few dark frames with your hand in front of your lens. This will make it easier to find the start and end of the shot in Lightroom later on by looking at the thumbnails of the photos. That is a proper load of text, so let's recap. Set camera to manual mode. Enable RAW photos. Dial in correct exposure settings. Set ISO and white balance manually too. Frame up your photo and zoom out a little bit. Focus your shot and disable autofocus and image stabilization. Set desired interval on your intervalometer. Hit start and let the sequence run for at least 300 photos or longer. There are a few things that I've taken away from going to film school that have really changed my life as a, whatever you want to call it, content creator, time-lapse photographer, film, documentary editor, whatever it is. One of the most crucial things in any aspect of this industry is efficiency. I once said I'm passionate about efficiency at a dinner table with some of my fellow Instagrammers on a campaign, and they kind of laughed at me. But the thing is, efficiency is key, especially for time-lapse photographers. We shoot thousands and thousands and thousands of photos every day throughout the year in different locations. A month from now, 6 months from now, a year, 10 years from now, you want to be able to revisit your footage and revisit the master files, the raw files that you shot on those days with ease to possibly remaster them or re-export them or make an edit with them. If your data, your raw files, your JPEGs, whatever it is that you're using in your project files are spread out over a hard drive and are inconsistent in their folder structure and their file organization, that sucks. You're gonna struggle. So for that, I came up with the solution of a sort of a unified, a sort of a template for my folder structures. And for every single shoot, for every single project, I generate this folder structure automatically using a template with an app called Post Haste. Your purchase of this course includes my Pro Timelapse template, and in case you didn't download it at the start or you lost it, which is not good file efficiency wise, you can find it as a download in this chapter as well. I'll quickly show you what Post Haste is. So Post Haste is a free app, works on Mac and PC, and it says organize your projects with customizable templates, and I've made a template for you. Quote on the website says, I firmly believe that every editor should have Post Haste in their arsenal, and I agree 100%. So let's have a look at the app Post Haste. This is what it looks like, and if you've just downloaded it and opened it for the first time, if you're on a Mac, you can go to File and then Import Template, and then you will be able to import these two files, the phparam and the protimelapsetemplate.pht. If you are on a PC, this import option might not be available. However, I've heard that you can just drag those files into the app and it will take it on as well then. So let's have a quick look at the, let me hide that. A quick look at Post Haste, the app itself. So here you have the project templates that are available. This is the Pro Timelapse template. And in this templates tab here, should zoom in a bit. Oh, no, that's not bad. That's not a good idea. In this templates one, you have the template. And this is what it looks like. So as I'm sure you can tell, the template, the word template will be replaced with whatever it is that you put in here as the project name. So say, for example, I want to create a new project. There's a solar eclipse happening at the time of filming today, so I'll just call it Eclipse. This date gets updated automatically every time you open the app. This is the project name that I'm giving it. This project number isn't used. It's just something handy for myself. Client isn't relevant, and editor Machos isn't relevant either. At the bottom here, you get a preview that says the date of today and Eclipse. And now, based on this template structure here, if I hit Create Project, you will find this new folder structure that just got automatically generated. And let's compare that to the template here. So you see how this all lines up. So template has been replaced with the word Eclipse as well as the date. And the cool thing about this app is that it automatically can generate Lightroom catalogs, Final Cut projects, Premiere Pro projects, and After Effects projects as well. And they already include the file name and the formatting that we'll be using. To offload your footage, you upload it in this raw folder here with Cam A and Cam B and MISC. You can put whatever in there. You can modify this quite easily as well here in this templates folder on the side. And then your time-lapse renders will end up in this folder. And if, as you can see here in my movies stuff, I've got all these folders and they all exist in the exact same way. They have the same templates, and on all of my hard drives from the last however many years since I started using this, like 6 years ago, they all have the same structure. So if someone asks me, can you send me a fresh export of that file? It is super easy for me to go back to the original folder structure, find the original raw files and re-export it. My project files are in there, the Lightroom catalog's in there, the raw files are in there, and it's just something nice and efficiently contained. And I highly recommend you use something like this yourself. Use my Pro Timelapse template, adjust it however you want, and stay efficient. Quick little video, this one about offloading your footage from your memory card to your hard drive. What is the best way? You can plug in your camera via a USB-C port, but that's usually going to be slower. The fastest way is to use a fast card reader. I have an Anker USB-C / Thunderbolt hub, which is quite fast. So plug in your or insert your memory card into the hub, and then you are going to want to go into the memory card, go to the folders, select the folders that you want to copy, and then depending on your Mac or PC, whatever, Command-C or Control-C, copy it, or right-click, hit copy, and then you're going into the raw folder that we just generated using post haste, and then you can go into Cam-B and hit paste two items, or Command-V or Control-V if you are on a PC, of course. The thing you should never do is dragging and dropping using your mouse, because in some operating systems this consists as a cut operation, where if something happens between the transfer or there's a power outage, whatever, you can corrupt the hard drive or the memory card that you are copying from. Use a dedicated reader, use the copy and paste, or you can even go further and use a dedicated data transfer tool, which might be even safer, but that's a whole other level that we're not going to today. Copy and paste it from the card to your drive, and then we're going to import these into Lightroom Classic now and a bunch of other apps to generate our video files. You've made it to my preferred workflow. This is the method that I use for 99% of all my time-lapse sequences. The reason I use this is because there's no loss of quality of the images because of an intermediary file like a JPEG sequence. We can batch export all these sequences in one go from After Effects or from Media Encoder, etc. Because these videos have to stand on their own, I will show you the entire process again in case you just watched the Photoshop one, but we will be going quickly over the import and color grading process in Lightroom Classic. So let's begin by importing the footage. Lightroom Classic, you can just drag your photo folder in there. This is the 50 raw photos from that cool storm. Once again, you are using the add method here at the top, which keeps the photos in the location on the hard drive because we are in control of organizing those files, of course. Adding them to the catalog, and once again I will be selecting the first photo, and then I hit the D button, which brings us into the Develop tab, and then using the time-lapse presets, I am just going to quickly give this a grade just like that, like we did last time. Drop the highlights, up the exposure just a wee bit, and let's just go with that. Now I hit G to go back to the library overview, select all the images, or rather, let's go to the develop settings and copy those settings first. Make sure they're all checked, copy, then we select all the images, Command or Control A, depending on your system. Back, right-click, develop settings, paste settings. This copies and pastes the settings from the first photo to the rest of the sequence. We'll talk about how we can speed this up in a future video using a workaround-free plugin and a paid plugin as well, because this process is just quite time-consuming in Lightroom Classic these days. Now, this is where it differs from the previous video. We've just applied an edit to a raw file, but this edit it only exists in Lightroom because we've told Lightroom that we want to grade it this way, right? So how is After Effects, which we'll be using to transform this footage, how is After Effects going to know the edits that we apply to these images, right? Well, it's a very simple answer. You make sure that all these images are selected still, you right-click, and then you go to the metadata selection, and then you say Save Metadata to Files. And if I'm quick enough, I can show you, I hope my system's not too laggy. Here in the file browser, you can see that all these raw files are getting a little file next to them, XMP files. These are sidecar files, sorry. And they contain all the editing data, which is, you know, numerical edits pretty much. So if we open this with, for example, text edit, you will see this is a text based method of color grading. So look at, for example, let's go to a setting that we can recognize here, highlights -100, which is one of the edits that we did. So this section here, midtone split 60, sharpness 60, sharpen radius 1. So this is a numerical or a text-based approach of the edits that we've done in the develop module on the side in Lightroom. And the reason that we want these files here is because After Effects is going to recognize those sidecar files rather, and it is going to apply the edits from Lightroom to the raw file and then export that into a video file. So now let's open up After Effects and I'll show you how to import this color graded sequence into After Effects and how to edit it to a final raw file. Let's fix my view here. While I'm filming this course, I realize I'll make an extra chapter with overviews for all these softwares because I know it can be daunting if you want to get into it, but you don't have the context or the basics, I guess, of these apps. So expect that to come in a future chapter as well. There's a couple of ways you can import stuff into After Effects. You can go to File and go Import, and then Import File, or you can drag stuff in there, or you can double click here in this window. If you double click, then that opens up. But what I'm going to do is in this window here, this raw folder, I'm just going to drag that raw folder, which contains the raw files, the RW2 raw files and the XMP files with the same file names, as you can see. I'm just going to drag that folder in here, which is going to automatically recognize that it's a sequence, once again, because of these numerical or sequential ending numbers there. And this is the camera raw editor. As you can see in these panels, the color grade is already there because it is in that text file. Hit OK, and voila, here we have it. Is it visible? This is a image sequence, noted by this little icon at the start. And the image sequence has the name of the length of frames at the end here. What you want to do now is either drag that onto this composition that's behind my head. So let's go right click and go New Comp from Selection. And what this does is it creates a comp, which is short for composition. Now, a composition generated in this way automatically takes on the characteristics of this image sequence. So it will take on the frame rate, the aspect ratio, the resolution, etc. Now all that's left to do is render this composition. It's literally as simple as that. And you can do that by having this composition selected. Then you go to File, Export, Add to Render Queue, which contains the render in After Effects. Another method, we can send it to Adobe Media Encoder, but I'll talk about that in a bit. Now, what you want to do is go through these render settings, and I'll walk you through the ones I use. So open up the render settings window, quality best, resolution full, no proxies, no effects, nothing, because we haven't applied anything to it. Time sampling, I actually never check any of this because it's preset, but these are the settings I use if you want to copy those. Then the output module, this is where we're going to choose our format and our codec. So I'm using a QuickTime wrapper, I guess, a .mov file this is going to be. And then you click on the format options, and this is where you can select which codec you're going to use. The Apple ProRes codec is great for further color grading and further editing. They're quite large in file size. I keep looking at the camera without the camera being active. They're quite large in file size, but it's worth it. So if you want the highest possible quality without going overboard with an extra channel, an alpha channel, you select the 422 HQ, which is my recommended use for time-lapse master files, as I call them. So just set it to that. You can copy all this. There's no need to resize here because this workflow consists of exporting the master files, the highest resolution files. That's that. And then you want to set your export or your output path, which is going to be, of course, the render folder from this file structure that we generated using Post Haste. And you set that to that. And now you hit render and it will start rendering. Now, this is just After Effects. Once you start the render button, your entire After Effects will be dedicated, committed to rendering, which means you won't be able to work in After Effects anymore. So if you don't want that, you can, with this composition selected, if you want to keep working in After Effects, you can go to File, Export, and then add it to the Adobe Media Encoder queue. This is going to open up Adobe Media Encoder here. Usually takes a little while to become active. And it's pretty much the same render module, but it will mean that, here it is, it's opening up. It'll mean that we can still keep working in After Effects while it's rendering in the Media Encoder queue. And let's just find that ProRes. You're going to want to find the right preset here. This is the Apple ProRes 422. Now there's two versions of each one. The top one puts it in an MXF wrapper, but we are working with MOV or QuickTime files. So you drag that on there and you can see here, this will be a .mov file. You set the output path as well. And if I now hit render there, Adobe Media Encoder will start rendering and I can keep working in After Effects on stabilizing other stuff or whatever. Keep in mind that the process to render raw files to video files is incredibly intense for your processor. Depending on your system, you can go through it in a breeze, but me being on a laptop, it always clogs up the system and it means that I won't even be able to film doing that, and there's no point in showing you that anyway. But hit the render in After Effects or hit start in Adobe Media Encoder and sit back and wait. What I do, however, usually is batch edit a bunch of sequences and then drag them in there, and then when I'm finished working for the day, I'll hit render on it so it renders overnight, because my system will be useless anyway. And that is how I use Lightroom Classic and Adobe After Effects and possibly Media Encoder for the export to render the highest possible resolution and quality time-lapse files. Once again, this is better than working with an intermediary file because there's less conversions. To go from a source file to a video file is better than to go from a source file to an intermediary file to the end video file. And that's that. On to the next one. In a previous chapter,